Looking into the abyss of the human mind, one can discover something more than just a lack of intelligence. It is about deeply rooted patterns of behavior that, like shackles, hold a person captive in ignorance, weakness, and the inability to recognize their own mistakes. And the most tragic thing is that a truly misguided mind is not even aware of its sad fate. Such a person is doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over, stubbornly refusing to learn from bitter experience. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, they prefer to blame the whole world for their troubles. As Jung once remarked, until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In other words, an ignorant person wanders through life, complaining about bad luck, unfavorable circumstances, and the machinations of other people, not realizing that the true cause of their suffering lies in their own blind spots. This is the quintessence of delusion. Such a person allows their most harmful habits to dictate the rules of the game, and instead of recognizing their destructive power, they naively believe that this is how it should be. They do not control the situation, but merely go with the flow, like a helpless puppet, repeating the same self-destructive cycles over and over again. However, one must recognize the undeniable fact. Stupidity is a conscious choice of everyone, and if an individual does not recognize destructive behavioral patterns in themselves and does not make efforts to eradicate them, they risk making this choice again and again without even realizing it. In case someone seeks to avoid a similar fate or wants to learn how to recognize these characteristic features in others, they should pay close attention to the following signs. Below are 6 undeniable indicators pointing to a foolish person. First, they are convinced of their own omniscience. Nothing testifies to stupidity so clearly as the unwillingness to learn. Such an individual naively believes that they already know all the answers to any questions. They do not bother with a critical analysis of their own thinking, do not strive to acquire new knowledge, and categorically refuse to admit their mistakes. Instead of developing and improving, they frantically cling to their outdated beliefs as if they were the ultimate truth. In the Holy Scripture, namely in the book of Proverbs 18:2, it is wisely said, "A fool does not delight in understanding, but only in revealing his own mind." The famous psychoanalyst Jung once remarked, "Thinking is difficult, that's why most people judge." Such a person will engage in fierce arguments about things in which they are completely incompetent. They will dismiss with disdain the advice of people with greater experience and wisdom. They will ridicule new ideas, labeling them as useless or erroneous, simply because they contradict their established beliefs, and will stubbornly defend their ignorance. Instead of moving forward and progressing, they doom themselves to stagnation and spiritual numbness. In psychology, there is a compelling explanation for such behavior, the Dunning-Kruger effect. This phenomenon demonstrates that people who do not have deep knowledge in a certain area are often prone to overestimating themselves, overestimating their own abilities. At the same time, truly competent specialists, on the contrary, are aware of the boundlessness of their knowledge and understand how much more there is to learn. A person subject to this cognitive illusion falls into a trap of self-deception. It seems to them that they are an expert based on a superficial acquaintance with the topic, for example, after watching one video on YouTube. They may imagine that they understand complex issues of economics, politics, or psychology better than professionals with many years of experience. Such a person tends to pass off their personal, often limited experience as a universal truth. However, their ignorance is so great that they do not even realize the extent of their ignorance. How does this way of thinking negatively affect a person's life? First of all, it stops their personal and professional growth. Being confident in their infallibility, they do not see the need for further training and improvement. In addition, they repel others. Arrogance and ignorance do not inspire respect, but, on the contrary, lead to the fact that people lose interest in communicating with them. Such a person makes erroneous decisions, unable to see their own shortcomings and blind spots. As a result, they repeat the same costly mistakes over and over again. In the professional field, this leads to stagnation. People who refuse to learn and develop inevitably lag behind, do not acquire new skills, do not adapt to changing conditions, and eventually find themselves in a dead end without prospects for further growth. A wise person chooses a completely different path. True intelligence is revealed in the ability to ask profound questions, the eagerness to seek experienced mentors, and the willingness to consider diverse viewpoints, recognizing that genuine wisdom is the result of continuous learning and self-improvement. As Socrates once remarked, "I know that I know nothing," emphasizing the boundless nature of knowledge. A wise person surrounds themselves with individuals who surpass them in knowledge and experience, actively seeks constructive feedback and criticism, questions their own beliefs, and, when necessary, is prepared to revise them based on new data and arguments. However, if an individual never asks questions, does not dedicate time to reading and learning, and refuses to acknowledge the possibility of being wrong, it is indicative not of intelligence, but rather of stubbornness and rigidity of thought. A foolish person never accepts responsibility for their actions and their consequences, finding endless excuses for their failures and missteps. Their erroneous decisions are attributed to the deceit of others, and their lack of success to the hostility of the world around them. They never admit their own mistakes, preferring to blame their misfortunes on bad luck, society, the authorities, or their family. Anyone but themselves. When faced with failure, they seek culprits externally instead of analyzing their own actions and learning from the experience. In the event of a relationship breakdown, they tend to blame the opposite sex, unwilling to look at themselves critically and acknowledge their role in what happened. Such a person lives in a world of denial, because accepting responsibility would mean admitting that they are the cause of the lack of progress in their lives, which is extremely painful and unacceptable to them. Responsibility is a sure sign of a mature personality and developed intellect. An individual incapable of acknowledging their own mistakes is doomed to stagnation and deprived of the opportunity for personal growth. A narrow-minded person tends to see themselves merely as a pawn in the hands of fate, not recognizing themselves as the architect of their own life. Their failures are always explained by external factors. Poverty is attributed to the injustice of the system, poor health to genetic predisposition, and lack of career advancement to the machinations of the authorities. They skillfully convince themselves of a lack of control over what is happening. However, the bitter truth is that people are willing to resort to the most absurd excuses just to avoid a confrontation with their own conscience. This is precisely what a narrow-minded person does, runs away from themselves. Instead of facing their shortcomings, they erect an impregnable wall of excuses, protecting their vulnerable ego. But what happens when a person stubbornly refuses to take responsibility for their actions? They condemn themselves to years of treading water, repeating the same mistakes. They lose the respect of those around them, who can see through their transparently false excuses. They deprive themselves of the opportunity for development, since growth is impossible without accepting responsibility. And most frighteningly, they lose control of their own lives. After all, the harsh reality is that by blaming others, a person gives them power over themselves. The moment the phrase, "it's not my fault," is uttered, there is a rejection of the ability to self-improvement and to change one's destiny. Let's take a close look at the striking difference between a narrow-minded person and one who possesses wisdom. The former tends to blame the surrounding world for their failures, while the latter demonstrates flexibility, adapting to circumstances and finding constructive solutions. A narrow-minded person wastes time searching for excuses for their missteps, while a wise person, on the contrary, finds a way out of any, even the most difficult situation without wasting time on fruitless apologies. A fool avoids any discomfort, striving for imaginary well-being, while a wise person accepts it as an inevitable part of life, understanding that personal growth lies precisely in overcoming difficulties. This is why narrow-minded people often remain in poverty, experience bitterness and a sense of hopelessness, while wise people continue to develop, reaching new heights and achieving victories. Therefore, it is worth asking yourself, do you take full responsibility for your life, or do you subconsciously play the role of a victim of circumstances? The answer to this question is crucial for your future destiny. Another of the most obvious signs of a narrow-minded person is their inability to control their emotions. In fact, it is emotions that control them, pushing them to rash actions. Such a person tends to react impulsively rather than respond thoughtfully. They allow their feelings to dictate their actions, often making hasty decisions that they later bitterly regret. Instead of addressing problems with wisdom and composure, they resort to yelling, despair, or simply running away from difficulties, unwilling to overcome them. Take, for instance, someone prone to anger outbursts. They are consumed by uncontrollable rage over minor inconveniences, whether it's a traffic jam, a delayed text message response, or a difference of opinion. They mistakenly believe that such a reaction demonstrates their strength, but in reality, it's a sign of weakness. Or consider someone prone to overreacting. Any problem, no matter how insignificant, seems like the end of the world to them. Instead of seeking constructive solutions, they wallow in despair and self-pity. Then there's the impulsive individual whose actions lack forethought. They rashly spend money, impulsively quit their job, and say things they later regret during arguments. In such cases, emotions completely control the person, not the other way around. As the eminent psychologist Jung cautioned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. For those who lack emotional control, their unconscious reactions become the defining factors of their life path. They don't resort to rational thinking and strategic planning, but rather react impulsively to what is happening. And when something goes wrong, they tend to blame everyone around them except themselves. Such individuals mistakenly equate aggression with strength, believing that shouting loudly proves they are right. However, in reality, a person who cannot control themselves is demonstrating weakness. Those who haven't mastered their emotions will inevitably be susceptible to manipulation by others. They are easily controlled because anyone who knows how to exploit their pain points can control their behavior. Furthermore, they become prisoners of circumstance, prone to instability, as their mood is directly dependent on external factors beyond their control. Ultimately, they find themselves under the control of their own minds, sabotaging their success, relationships, and opportunities because they react to events emotionally rather than logically. In contrast to a person prone to fleeting impulses, a wise person is a model of equanimity in the most challenging circumstances. They recognize the transient nature of emotions and don't allow them to dictate their actions. As the ancient wisdom states, a fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps himself under control. Proverbs 29:11. True personal strength lies in the ability to master one's feelings, to keep them under control. Discerning individuals are distinguished by their ability to choose when to speak and when to remain silent, maintaining composure even in tense situations. They resolve disagreements with reason and tact, avoiding impulsive outbursts of anger. Instead of succumbing to immediate reactions, they pause to reflect on their feelings. Before lashing out or taking an ill-considered step, they take the time to analyze their experiences. Wise people channel the energy of emotions into constructive avenues. Instead of allowing anger to destroy relationships, they use it as a stimulus for personal growth and self-improvement. They master their thinking, develop self-awareness, learn to recognize when emotions are taking over, and shift their attention to a rational perception of reality. The ability to control one's emotions is the key to managing one's own life. A truly strong person is not the one with the loudest voice or the strongest muscles, but the one who maintains composure, thinks clearly, and makes sound decisions that lead to real achievements. A person's environment is an eloquent testament to their essence. Their inner circle serves as a kind of mirror, reflecting their prospects for personal development. By analyzing an individual's circle of acquaintances, one can predict their life path with a high degree of probability. Often, short-sighted people surround themselves with those who contribute to their degradation. In particular, this refers to people with negative thinking, whose complaints and pessimism poison the atmosphere around them. It can also include lazy individuals who prefer idle pastimes to creative work and self-development. No less dangerous are sycophants who are ready to agree unconditionally with any decisions, indulging weaknesses and delusions. Finally, these may be people as lost and disoriented as the individual themselves, not striving to find mentors and preferring to remain in their comfort zone. Not without reason did I. Goethe note, "Tell me who your friend is, and I will tell you who you are." A foolish person fears personal growth and avoids the discomfort that inevitably accompanies development. He shies away from people who surpass him in intellect, discipline, or success, as their presence makes him aware of his own shortcomings. Weak people run from discomfort, while strong people embrace it as a stimulus for growth. Instead of striving to be the least knowledgeable in a society of brilliant minds, a simpleton prefers to flaunt his imaginary intellect among his peers. This gratifies his ego but irreparably harms his potential for growth. According to the eminent psychologist Jung, the human psyche has an amazing ability to unconsciously absorb the behavior patterns, thought processes, and energetic attitude of those around it. This means that by spending time in the company of people prone to failure, one risks adopting their mindset and beginning to think like a loser. Immersion in an atmosphere of negativity inevitably leads to the formation of a negative worldview. Association with people lacking self-discipline is fraught with the loss of one's own organization and purposefulness. If a person's immediate environment consists of people living in poverty, mired in laziness, and lacking clear life goals, it is not difficult to predict his own future. However, a wise person acts quite differently. He actively seeks to associate with people who challenge him, stimulate his development, and cause him to experience a healthy sense of discomfort that encourages growth. As the famous saying goes, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Smart people are careful about choosing their environment. They seek to surround themselves with mentors, people who have already reached the heights they aspire to, friends who are not afraid to point out shortcomings and push them to improve, and winners, purposeful, disciplined, and ambitious individuals. All this is due to a simple but important understanding. The environment shapes a person to a much greater extent than he himself realizes. A foolish person allows his environment to exert uncontrolled influence on him. A wise person, on the other hand, takes control of the situation and shapes his own environment, striving to ensure that it contributes to his personal growth and development. So, here's the real question: who shapes a person's immediate environment? If an individual finds himself in a society full of fools, it is quite likely that he himself is one of them. A foolish person puts pleasure above discipline, becoming a slave to his own impulses. He prefers comfort to challenges, entertainment to personal growth. Such a person indulges in fleeting pleasures without thinking about the coming consequences. Instead of creating something important and lasting, he wastes precious time on cheap dopamine injections, meaningless entertainment, junk food, endless scrolling through social media feeds, alcohol, drugs, or casual relationships that leave him empty. This is a direct path to self-destruction. As Jung argued, the human mind is an arena of battle between the higher and lower self. When an individual constantly chases pleasure, he allows his lower self, his most primitive and undisciplined impulses, to take control of his life. Fools live for today, striving for fleeting pleasures, while the wise invest in their future. In other words, a person who cannot curb his desires becomes their prisoner. In today's world, full of temptations and instant gratification, the path to degradation has become easier than ever. Society offers a kaleidoscope of quick fixes that distract from pressing tasks and personal growth. When feeling bored, a person can aimlessly immerse himself in an endless social media feed. When longing takes over the soul, alcohol or drugs become an easy way to numb the senses. Loneliness pushes one to seek casual relationships in the virtual space, where a single gesture separates one from fleeting contact with a stranger. A lack of motivation is compensated for by immersion in the world of video games, creating the illusion of success. Without real effort, day after day, people lacking inner strength prefer short-term doses of dopamine, abandoning discipline and self-control. The consequences are not long in coming. Dreams remain unrealized, the body weakens, and the mind becomes inert. Years later, such people wake up, tormented by the question of why they never became who they could have been. A fool asks, "What will bring pleasure here and now?" The wise man asks, "What will make my future better?" The unwise spend precious time on fleeting entertainment, while the far-sighted invest it in self-improvement. A lazy person spends days watching TV shows, while a wise person develops skills, trains the body, and strengthens the mind. The weak spend money on parties and useless things, while the wise save, invest, and build a foundation for future well-being. The undisciplined jump from one casual relationship to another, while the wise build strong connections and choose a partner who can inspire and support them. That's why only the disciplined reach the top. As the wise proverb says, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down." Proverbs 21:20. The greatest figures in history, warriors, leaders, philosophers, have always lived according to the principles of discipline. They woke up early, trained their minds, controlled their desires, and focused on achieving their goals. The pursuit of pleasure is a cunning trap into which an unwise person easily falls, while a wise person knows how to keep their desires under control. The inability to control oneself opens the door to external influence and control. One of the most dangerous forms of foolishness is the inability to learn from one's own mistakes when a person repeatedly makes the same blunders. This behavior makes them a prisoner of their own ignorance. No matter how many opportunities life provides, they continue to step on the same rakes in relationships, business, or personal development. Have you met people who constantly get involved with toxic personalities, wondering about the subsequent pain, make incorrect financial decisions, facing financial difficulties, or get bogged down in self-destructive habits such as procrastination, laziness, or addictions, without changing their approach? Carl Jung called this unconscious repetition, the tendency to reproduce harmful patterns of behavior from the past that seem familiar, even if they bring suffering. A fool never asks, "Why do I constantly find myself in this situation?" Instead, they prefer to play the role of victim, blaming the unfairness of life or other people for their failures. In reality, life experience becomes a mentor only for those who show a desire for knowledge. As A. Einstein once remarked, it is reckless to expect change while tirelessly repeating the same actions. Life does not stop offering lessons, but the question is whether a person is able to learn them or is doomed to repeat past mistakes. A wise person chooses a different path. They carefully study their failures. Instead of avoiding painful experiences, they analyze them. What went wrong? What actions could have been taken differently? What lesson does life teach them? The difference between a fool and a wise person is not in the number of mistakes made, for both inevitably face failures. The difference is that a fool is doomed to repeat their mistakes, while a wise person learns valuable lessons from them. The harsh reality is that if a person stubbornly continues to make wrong decisions, life will punish them again and again until they finally realize their mistake. Therefore, it is worth asking whether they are learning from their past mistakes or are doomed to repeat them. As an additional sign, unwise people talk more than they listen. They love the sound of their own voice, strive to dominate conversations, interrupt their interlocutors, and rarely show sincere interest in other people's opinions. Why is this a sign of foolishness? Because it is through listening that we learn about the world, build relationships, gain new perspectives, and develop as individuals. A person who cannot listen deprives themselves of opportunities for growth and self-improvement. After considering 6 vivid signs characterizing a short-sighted person, a logical question arises: how to avoid falling into these mental traps? After all, in truth, each of us at certain moments in life has been characterized by some of these behavioral patterns. The main thing is to recognize their manifestations in time and take the necessary adjustments. Wisdom is not an innate gift, and intelligence is not reduced to a high IQ or encyclopedic knowledge. It is, first of all, self-awareness, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances, and discipline, allowing for making informed choices. So, how to break free from the shackles of short-sightedness and start developing genuine intelligence. The following sections will discuss in detail the specific steps necessary to overcome these negative patterns of behavior and transition to a qualitatively new level of thinking. In the meantime, you are invited to share your thoughts in the comments. Which of these 6 signs have you had to observe in others, or perhaps even in yourself? Let's discuss it together. So, if the desire to break free from the captivity of ignorance and develop genuine intelligence is sincere, then here's what needs to be done. Self-analysis is the first step on the path to personal growth. It's essential to shed the mask of self-deception and confront reality head-on. A truthful self-assessment involves identifying recurring errors and accepting personal responsibility instead of blaming external factors. It's crucial to evaluate your inner circle. Are they individuals who inspire growth, or those who drag you back into stagnation? As Carl Jung stated, people will go to great lengths to avoid facing their own souls. Progress is impossible without honestly acknowledging one's weaknesses. The next step involves subduing the ego and cultivating humility. A fool believes they possess absolute knowledge, while a wise person recognizes the endless nature of learning. It's important to constantly question established beliefs and seek new knowledge in the world around us. Openness to feedback and a willingness to learn from others are hallmarks of a mature personality. Ceasing to learn is akin to halting personal development. Humility, curiosity, and awareness of the limits of one's knowledge are qualities necessary for continuous growth. Take control of your emotions. An unwise person is a puppet of their passions, tormented by anger, consumed by envy, and driven to rash actions by fleeting impulses. A wise person, however, knows how to master their emotions, carefully weighing each step before acting. Cultivate patience and composure. Learn to listen attentively rather than reacting hastily. Don't allow trivial matters to disrupt your peace of mind. Those who cannot control their emotions will inevitably become pawns in the hands of others. Seek interaction with people who surpass you in intellect and experience. If there's no one in your circle who is smarter than you, then your circle is too small. Seek wise mentors who can impart their knowledge and experience. Avoid associating with people who have a negative influence on you. Learn from those who have achieved greater success in life than you have. As Jim Rohn once noted, we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. Therefore, approach the selection of your circle with careful consideration and foresight. Extract valuable lessons from every mistake you make. This is perhaps the most important rule on the path to wisdom. Mistakes are inevitable in everyone's life. The question is whether you will learn useful lessons from them, analyze your actions, adapt to new circumstances and move forward, or whether you will be condemned to repeat the same errors. A wise person perceives each failure as a valuable experience that allows them to become better and stronger. A fool, on the other hand, neglects the lessons that life offers and continues to fall into the same traps repeatedly. Intelligence is not an innate quality, but a conscious choice. Foolishness is not an inevitable fate if an individual does not wish it to become their constant companion. Incredible power lies within each of us, the ability to transform, but realizing this potential requires relentless effort and dedication. It is necessary to bravely look into the mirror of one's own soul, acknowledge shortcomings and weaknesses, show humility, learn from mistakes, and surround oneself with people who will promote growth and development. Unfortunately, most people prefer to remain trapped in their habitual patterns of behavior, shifting blame onto others, evading responsibility for their actions, and wondering why their lives remain unchanged. But there are those who strive for more, who yearn for personal growth and development. It is such people like you reading these lines who seek to rise above the grey mass, to become those who constantly learn, adapt to new conditions, and achieve success. Now everything depends only on you. If these words resonated with your soul, if you felt a spark of inspiration, continue to seek new knowledge and ideas that will help you unlock your highest potential. Maintain mental acuity, be disciplined in your actions, and never stop learning, because continuous development is the key to success and self-realization.